Hello and welcome to Nomentia's and NetGuardian's webinar focusing on payments and cybercrime. And today we're going to cover topics that are quite actual and interesting for many. So really nice to see how many of you signed up today. We are going to talk about current fraud trends. We're going to talk about fraud typology and basically how it's creating corporate victims, what's predicted to happen this year and beyond. But also, of course, we all want to know how can we prevent that corporates and organizations actually get victimized by fraud. And before we start, I would like you to be reminded of the fact that this webinar will be recorded. You will be able to participate in the form of asking questions, and we will also have polls during this event. There's two ways of asking questions. Up right, you will see a function that enables you to ask a question privately. And down to the right, you will see a functionality that enables you to ask questions publicly. We will try and address your questions towards the end. We will have a Q&A session. And should we not answer your question specifically, we will, of course, get back to you after the webinar. So let's get started. I'm Anna-Lisa Natchev, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Nomentia, and I'm joined here today by a very interesting guest, our partner from NetGuardians. So, Rafael, could you please introduce yourself and NetGuardians?
Hello, Anna-Lisa. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. So I'm Rafael Mayo. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at NetGuardians. And NetGuardians, we are a Swiss company specialized in fraud prevention. So we created the company a bit more than 10 years ago, and we work across the globe with different entities to help them prevent fraud. And we are particularly active in the banking area where we started, and over the years we expanded in different verticals such as corporate payment.
All right, so banks and corporates.
Exactly, yes.
Great. Let's move on. So we are all thinking a lot about these topics lately, and we're also seeing an increase in the questions that we get asked from our clients. So that's why we decided today to start looking a bit on the fraud landscape. Rafael, could you take us through this, please?
Yeah, so let's have a look a little bit of the fraud or the cybercrime market. We see that globally the fraud loss is tremendous. We are talking about more than 42 billion that have been reported as a fraud losses in 2020, and that's obviously a significant number. And what is concerning is that this number has grown year after year. And it's not a kind of plan to get reduced. So a lot of analysts are kind of seeing this as a growing concern and a growing element going forward. What we see that cybercrime in general is really something that has shifted from over the year, an activity that maybe 20 years ago we could have seen it as a simple geek in their garage trying a few hacks to kind of be able to defraud people, to a real industry, something getting organized and really extremely sophisticated. So the cybercrime industry is actually a real industry for criminal. If we compare this 42 billion to the box office revenue film industry, we can see that it's exactly the same numbers, because the box office revenue film industry represent 42 billion. And we see how this industry drags a lot of investment and so on. So that's why now for cyber criminal, it's much better to enter into this kind of new type of crime than doing the traditional gangsters type of crime. So that's really a big shift. Now it's probably much easier to make money by defrauding people with a computer than using the classical robbery with weapon and so on. And that's why we've seen a huge rise in the fraud domain this past year.
Okay. So from the garages and individuals trying to hack in somewhere and robbers doing the sort of rob a bank scenario, it's now moving into more organizational type of crime.
Exactly, because we see that now with a computer, it gets really much. It's much easier to be able to perpetrate some crime. If you already look here, we are talking that the business email compromise type of fraud have increased already in 2019. So really, before the COVID, there were already trends where receiving kind of fake email or compromised email was a trend. So this business email compromise, it's slightly like the spam that we received on the early days and still continuing of internet, where you were receiving a mass amount of email. And here the fraudster are using kind of the same technique. In terms of volumes, they try to send massively this type of email, and we've seen that was already prior to the crisis or prior to the pandemic, a trend going up.
But I'm looking at the percentage, so 77% increase in 2019. That's a huge increase. Do you know what the reason is behind that?
Yeah, because basically one of the weakest link is always the human, and they understand, the criminals, that the behavior of people is the best and easy way to be able to usurpate or to steal, perpetrate a crime. And this email compromise, by usurpating the CEO name or forging a mail from a supplier, it's actually quite simple to do. You don't need kind of necessarily rocket science to perpetrate it. And actually, there are still a lot of companies that fall in this easy trap. And as you don't need sophisticated elements necessarily, and it still works, it's a good avenue for criminals to use to perpetrate their crime.
Yeah, I remember a story from years ago when it was the fact that the easiest way to hack into a corporate system was to throw out USB sticks in the parking lot, because someone would always pick up something free and stick it in their machine. So now they do it virtually via email instead.
Yeah, exactly. That there are plenty type of things of techniques like that works quite well. I even remember when I was living in Singapore and had my son who was into a school, we received a very well forged email coming from the school asking us to pay the semester fee into this new banking information. And actually, it was a fake email, and it was extremely difficult to spot that was not the genuine not the genuine communication.
I have to ask, did you pay it?
I didn't. As fortunately, I'm always a bit skeptical when I receive such a communication, and I did call school to make sure that it was actually a right communication, which it was not, and then they communicated all the parents that there were some attack ongoing to avoid some payments.
Okay.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the audience to chip in here. We're gonna release a poll, and I would like to ask you if any of you have suffered from an attempt or fraud in the last 12 months, for example, like Raphael said. And actually, we have the results, and 45% said yes, 15% said no, and I am not sure 40%. So Raphael, what do you think? Only 15% can for sure say they have not been the subject of at least an attempt.
So I'm definitely not surprised by these numbers, because it's true. Last year, we've seen really two types of activities ongoing. Before or just at the beginning of the COVID, of the pandemic, we've seen more type of fraud going into this COVID loan type of fraud, where a lot of government have tried to help organization by setting up loans and helping actually the economy. And the cyber criminal, the fraudster, really jumped into that bucket and tried to leverage this new type of tools that was available. And then after a couple of months, where kind of the shake of the pandemic was done, and the different governments have been able to work a bit better on the different process, how to give the different loan or help to the companies. We've seen that there were again a shift from this kind of fraud loan to the more company targeting companies, as we've seen that people started to work from home, so there were a change in the habits. So previously, when you have also people at the office, you see your colleague every day, it's always much easier to quickly ask a question or ask your colleague, oh, actually, is that payment really correct? And when you're isolated at your home, trying to do your work without anybody near you. So we've seen that really by the second semester, I would say, of last year, there were these shifts where, again, there were more rise on fraud cases targeting companies, trying to get to all these companies working from home.
Okay, so it really captured something happening in the market where people were forced to work from home, perhaps a bit unprepared. If you look at the structural setup, in our case, let's say, what we noticed was an increase of people looking at payment platforms, because all of a sudden people were working from home, having tokens to log into internet banks, for instance. So would you say that the fraud market capitalized on COVID?
Yeah, definitely. They definitely capitalized on this huge push of digitalization, because we've seen that from every industry that suddenly, since last year, there were an acceleration of this digitalization. Everybody wanted to do something more digital. And of course, when you open more channel in the rush, it creates, of course, a little bit more loopholes. And that's a huge reason that there were a huge spike in the digital transaction, and we see that in absolutely every sector: retail, telecommunication, banking. So every sector has been kind of impacted.
Okay. So if we look at the fraud trends, what are we seeing today?
So we've seen that if we look back from 2010 to now, we've seen that it was kind of slowing down in the early 2012, 2013, things was decreasing. And then there were a kind of huge trend going up. So we saw this over the years, and especially in our kind of business where that's what we do every day. We really see that the last 5 years it has been constantly an increase, especially with digitalization, and they are really, I would say, kind of top 5 type of fraud cases that we see a lot increasing. That is the impersonation scams that probably every people have faced once, either by receiving wrong phone calls or this type of emails, business email compromise. There also a lot of account takeover as there is more and more digitalization. People as well are kind of putting in all their system, their credit card, or to have kind of things, a good user experience. When you lose your account, then people can easily purchase goods on your behalf. And as well with the cryptocurrencies that was really booming or buzzwords these last years, there were tons of investment scams as well.
Okay. And you mean that they weren't sort of attack on someone, but the whole investment was a fraud to start with?
Exactly, and no later than just a week ago or a few days ago, there were this cryptocurrency platform in Turkey where actually the founder of the platform basically closed the platform and left with all the tokens of his clients, and he left with 2 billion. So that's typically things that we also have seen more touching the personal individual, because today we see more individual investing in cryptocurrency, even though there are companies like Tesla who start investing in type of crypto fund and so on. We also see here trends where there are more and more fraud in that regard.
So basically, we're saying that nearly 75% of organizations were targets of payment fraud attacks in 2020, and then also a rise in BEC type of fraud targeting companies. For those not familiar with the term, could you please explain that a bit? What is that type of fraud?
So the BEC, it's really the business email compromise.
Okay.
So it's really attempts, if you want, a cyber criminal look at the company and think, okay, I will try to target Nomentia. I will send an email to Nomentia. I will maybe look on LinkedIn who is the accountant who is working in the admin division. I will send them an email, and the email would be forged, thinking that it's the CEO or it's the CFO or someone who is kind of responsible, who give an order. Can you please do this urgent payment? Here at NetGuardians, it's quite funny with my business partner Joel. Often I receive email from him. So an email from Joel Winterregg, written in German, because in Switzerland we have many languages, but unfortunately Joel speaks French. So each time I receive this type of email, it's like okay, that's someone trying to usurpate his identity to be able to perpetrate an action.
But this leads me to a question, because now on LinkedIn, it has many usages, right? So should you actually be a bit cautious on what you put in there? Should you maybe not mention all the tools you work with or your direct responsibilities? Would that make it easier for them to target you and profile you?
So clearly that's definitely a good advice to always be cautious about what you publish online, what you put on Facebook, what you put on LinkedIn or any type of social platform, because there are a lot of cases where criminals, fraudsters are just smart. Because if you think of when you call your uh, telecommunication company or you banks, they always ask you this type of question: what is your birth date? What is your, where do you live? Some kind of, in my personal opinion, lame question. Then today with the social media, you can get that information extremely easily. And that's why it's important to pay attention on what you put online. And as well, online, there are a lot of these, just recently, there were still this article about LinkedIn having lost 500 million information, Facebook the same. So be conscious that your telephone number is something probably public, because it's probably been leaked on one or the other website. So it's important to remain to be careful on what goes on social media.
Yes. All right. And then invoice fraud, maybe a bit more clear, but do you have an example of that? Is that like you send a forged invoice?
Exactly. That's and they were an interesting case, because Google and Facebook actually get duped by this type of fraud, where someone knew that Google was typically working with a specific industry called quantum, and it was a Taiwanese company. So the person simply created a fake company called Quantum Ltd. So slightly changed the name and sent invoices with the same layout as this quantum company to the department, the accounting department, and the guy have been able to defraud for 100 million Google and Facebook. So it's not a small amount.
Did you say 400 million?
100 million.
Wow. Okay. So even they get attacked.
Exactly. Everybody basically is subject to be targeted by cyber criminal. Either big company, small, everybody is a potential target.
Okay. Let's look a bit deeper into this. We covered this to a large part, but if you look at the most sort of prevalent types of the BEC fraud, what should we read from this?
Here, maybe what is interesting is to see that there are kind of many type of business email compromise type of fraud. And if we look at also the latest report from Europol, we see that the business email compromise is really a big area of concern, because it's growing and it's becoming more and more sophisticated and super well targeted. We also seen that now there are cybercrime as a service. So there are group of hackers providing information to other criminals as a service in order to better kind of tailor your email. And if we look at the different type of business email compromise that we see a lot, is either some parties kind of simple element trying to request to change payment instruction, payment bank account by simply sending email. Oh, actually, you should. We have changed our bank detail. Can you please update your master data file and make sure that we will be you will pay the right to the right account in the future. And that's often it's criminal who knows what's going on by either they've been able to actively notice by kind of hacking one of the computer, understanding what are the different discussion within the company. So that's happened a lot when email have been hacked. So they try to understand what is the background, what is going on, and they might wait a couple of months before really targeting with a really precise email. You have also the classic kind of SEO fraud, where the email usurpates a senior executive. So they spoof the email domain, and they always try to target the finance person. We see now even more sophisticated, where they go up to, with all this new program of AI and what we call the deep fake. They usurpate the voice of some CEO to give actual phone call with the fake voice to usurpate the person on the accounting department.
Wow. And, so from emails to made up phone calls with AI voice.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we see that we have then as well is impersonating the vendor. So as well, these fake emails coming from your suppliers, trying to direct you on the wrong element. And what is interesting is that a lot of the companies actually do receive quite significant of this type of email. We see that some company receive easily more than 10% of them 20 to 100 times this type of request. So it's important as well to train people, but it's quite something that is really frequent. So it's easy sometimes to slip and click on the wrong link and do the mistake in this type of cases.
All right. And now we've been talking about external fraudsters, but we did a poll here to ask if the ones that had been subject to attempts or fraud was initiated by an unauthorized party or an authorized party. So we see that 81% was initiated by an unauthorized party, which is probably what we assumed as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, that's something that it's a bit what we see a lot, and we have categorized really the type of fraud. I mean, it's not us, it's the Fed who created this type of category, trying to be able to classify what type of fraud exists. And we see there are really two distinguished cases. The one where it's really an unauthorized party that do the action and defraud by either we see a lot of this technical support of phishing elements that take the control of your computer and be able to redirect the two-factor authentication and do the action on your behalf. And the other that is simply by social engineering, being able to make you do the wrong action. And I'm a bit surprised in the poll, because when you think of unauthorized party, it's very, very more sophisticated, because you need technical elements to take over the control of either a laptop, either a phone, or whatever. Then initiated by the authorized party is really, you just have been manipulated. And actually, people are, or some cyber criminal, if you think of the Roman scam that are also ongoing on the moment, it's just having the right speech and manipulating the person that is in front of you.
Do you think remote working and social distances of the COVID era has spiked the Roman scams? Are people lonely and more subjective to this type of approaches?
That's a very good question. I wouldn't be able to really know if that has been a big spike due to the COVID. It was a trend the last 5 years. It was still something going on, but it would indeed be interesting to see if this COVID actually exacerbated the last few months.
Yeah. Let's look a bit about what you can do, because now we've been speaking about the different types, the different topologies, how many are being attempted a year and by whom. But there are things we can do, and we're also going to release a poll now. We're going to discuss the findings soon. So me and Rafael gathered some, could you say maybe best practices here?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be interesting to hear from your point of view, because there are many ways for catching fraud, and all need to be set up, and typically with your solution of cash management, what are the practices that you set up in order to help your clients and institution to block the fraudulent payment or fraudulent attempt from fraudster?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So Nomentia has been around since the 80s, and even back then, actually having a payment platform, a centralized payment hub, and stopping the manual payments was the key, right? So already then in the 80s, we had basic fraud prevention, because if you are doing manual payments, you're even worst case walking with paper invoices to the bank and having them paid, you have no visibility. But it all starts, I think, with the cyber hygiene, and that's just everyone's responsibility in all organizations, no matter what your role is, to be aware and to be conscious and to really have a pragmatic approach about what's sent to you and what you're asked to do. So understanding your responsibilities and roles and what's not included in it, and the processes. It flows a bit into culture and education, which is what we do a lot. I think what we're going through here today is actually something that would be a good education piece for everyone working in a finance department and even a larger organization. It starts with the centralized view, having the audit trail. Even the fact that you know that there's an audit trail will lower the chances that any one of your employees will attempt, let's say, fraud. We also encourage enterprises and companies to work with having a full cash visibility and to spot deviations, meaning if you have a multinational organization, you have local business units with local bank accounts that do the local payments. Do you really know what's going on? Do you have the visibility? Can you spot the deviations on a centralized level? We talked a lot about emails now with you, Rafael, and I would say the worst possible solution is sending around a cash forecasting sheet in Excel via email. Because if someone snaps that up or changes something in it, or an employee changes something in it, there's just no way of tracking that. Not to mention if it should go to the wrong recipient, because fraud isn't always evil by thought. It could be just someone typing in the wrong address, right? And then it just lands somewhere it shouldn't, and then the snowball starts running from there. Segregation of duties, sophisticated authorization rules, really important. Can't stress that enough, because that would then prevent, even if somebody tried something, they couldn't do too much damage before you were caught. Because let's say that you have a longer authorization chain even up to 6 people looking at something with the sum is big enough, you would then have to have all 6 people in the scheme, right? To be able to get it through. Also, rules for anomaly detection, so rule-based, digital signatures, making sure materials don't get changed on the way, using MFA, really simple thing to start using, and also the policies that we have, so working with the ISO certificate, the ISAE, and of course the SWIFT customer security processes. But I would like to hear from you. How can AI build on top of that? This, let's say, process-driven security.
So the AI and technology is definitely complementary to all the process-driven and training and communication that has to be done within a company. And now we use as well all the behavioral intelligence technology to be able to better understand the flows, where the money has been going in the past, to rely as well on what we call collective intelligence, meaning to be able to understand from not only one client, but for a community. Because if you have thousands of clients that have sent money to this supplier, and for you it might be the first time that you send money to this supplier, but you know that within your community you already had 1,000 times people sending money to these ones, the likelihood of being a fraud is much lower. And if for you it's the first time, you don't know. And using these techniques set on AI help to really spot the new pattern, especially when there are these sophisticated cases where you receive fake phone calls or there are your computer that have been hacked and there is really perfect targeted email that have been done that looks genuine. We look really from when the payment needs to be executed before it is executed, if it really makes sense. And analyzing that, putting some warning sign by saying, oh, this payment actually looks definitely unusual. Let's have a second look at it. And until the people in the organization really looked at it, nothing goes out, because now it's becoming really difficult to retrieve money when a payment is executed, as we live more and more in this fast payment world where the money flows extremely fast and can move from 10 institutions in less than a day, and then it becomes almost impossible to retrieve it.
So it's a bit like scoring vendors in the first case when you compare with peers. I have bought from this one before, it's safe.
Yeah, exactly. That's we can see it like that. We can see that we are using actually on the global scales the money flows to better understand if some kind of vendors might be more at risk or not, and as well related to your own organization, if it's usual that you pay this supplier at this specific time in the week, in the month, and so on.
Let's take a look at the poll. So we asked you guys if you would add AI technology to help you protect your organization from payment fraud. So a quite large majority says yes. Nobody actually said no. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's quite surprising actually that everybody sees that actually AI technology could be a good help in payment fraud.
Indeed. I think we could take some questions. We still have a bit left here towards the end. So I'm gonna read from the screen here. Does Nomentia provide some AI-driven fraud prevention tool in one of its modules? So we are launching the rule-based anomaly detection, but my friend Raphael here is the correct person to help you. So we can be in touch about that later. We have another question. In your lecture, you told about cryptocurrency hack. What is the future of digital currency transaction comparing with euro or US dollar?
So that's a really tough question.
That's a tough one.
And I mean, I'm not an oracle, so I see, we see really two things in the market. You see either some government that try at the maximum to block the cryptocurrency, trying to use the regulator to block it. So on that perspective, I see more a kind of a dead end. And on the other side, you see others who really want to open it completely. So I don't think it's going to be either one or the other. It's going to be balance, but with the fraud money that goes in nowadays, it's definitely going to be a player in the future.
I am quite interested to see the development of DeFi, actually, because DeFi is, I think, a more enterprise-friendly version, and I'm looking at the development, quite interested. I'm sure you do too, Raphael. So we go a bit away from the pure crypto and these kind of crypto, marketing campaigns, and we are looking way more into actual use cases. Decentralized finance also has the DNA to become extremely secure and extremely well audited. If you look at the whole idea of it, is just build a long audit trail, right? So it's going to be interesting to see. I do have, Raphael, we do have time for 2 more questions, I think, at least one. So I have one here. Are there differences between regions when it comes to fraud? Do we see it more in some parts of the world than others?
So that was also something that we were surprised in our study, is that actually there isn't that many difference between region. We've seen the same trends of growth of payment fraud across US, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Of course, they were slightly shifted between also months when there were the pandemic who started, who end up, and things like that. But globally, we see the trend that is similar. There are some countries where there are still kind of the check that is quite well present, that it's still ongoing, and payment and fraud in Czech are still high, but globally we see the same type of trends everywhere.
So I would say that cybercrime fraud is also a pandemic at the moment. And speaking of pandemics, I think our last question here. Do we think that cybercrime will reduce when the pandemic is over? So when people are back in the office?
So as a personal opinion, I don't believe so. I believe that now, as more and more cyber criminals have seen it as a good opportunity and good way to make money, they will just go even more deeper in that direction. And even with people going back at office, they will find new ways to target companies and try to defraud organization.
So it's here to stay. I have actually, we have time for one more. This was a quite interesting one. Is it possible to compare fraud attempts and successful fraud attempts?
So yes, basically, a success fraud attempt is when you have lost the money, when the money has gone to the wrong beneficiary, whether you have been able to retrieve it or not. And the attempt is when, if we take this email, business email compromise, when you notice it way up front and don't pursue to do the payment. So that's really the difference between the attempts. There are plenty attempts that are blocked, unfortunately, and actually the one who succeed are the money that you have really difficulties to repay.
Okay, I think that it for us. So we thank you all for attending, and the ones of you who send in some questions that we didn't have time to answer, we will be in touch from our side. And thank you so much, Raphael, for attending, and for you guys listening. We are working closely with Net Guardians, so it's a possibility to approach either Raphael directly or us, and we will make sure that we look into your situation, your questions more directly.
Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely afternoon.
Yes. Be cautious of emails.
Absolutely.
Thank you.